In the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome to this special edition of Ukrainian Profile. I am your host, Derick Fage. We have a wonderful hour ahead of you. Many different perspectives when it comes to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. A lot of people, of course, feeling helpless. Certainly want to update you on what's happening in this very moment and, of course, some of the history behind this crisis and how this came to be. I am joined by some wonderful guests. First of all, in studio, Ron Sorobey. He is the community producer of Ukrainian Profile. Ron, welcome. Great to have you here. And virtually, we are joined by Anna Dombrovska. She is projects officer with CNEWA Canada, and Mr. Andrii Bukvych. He is the Chargé d'affaires with the Ukrainian embassy here in Canada. Welcome to all of you. And Ron, I want to start off because this is a great opportunity to talk about the Ukrainian people and a little bit of the history of Ukraine, and perhaps you can talk about its people and its culture and just tell our viewers a little bit about it.
Certainly. Thank you, Derick. Ukrainian culture goes back at least 4,000 years to the time of even the Stone Age. The first real inkling of civilization was the Trypillian culture, which was a late Stone Age, early Bronze Age community. And they had villages, towns set up, which was quite a feat back in those days. The Slavs migrated into that area around roughly, depending on what you believe, around 1000 BC, from an area which is where Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine sort of meet. It was set up, but unfortunately, like a lot of it being a flat plain, it was overrun by different cultures like the Sarmatians and the Scythians. But by the about around 500 AD, Kiev was established by the Slavs. So Kiev is over 1,500 years old. That developed. The first real state to be formed was under Grand Prince Volodymyr the Great, who introduced Christianity in 988. And that was the starting point. Culture, it progressed there. The problem was, in terms of succession, what happened was a principality was divided amongst all the sons. There was an attempt by King Daniel Romanovich to restart it, but unfortunately, in the first part of the 13th century, the Mongols came, and that destroyed that medieval civilization. The next important period was the Cossack period. The Zaporozhian Cossacks, which were formed in the late 15th, early 16th centuries, came to prominence in the first part of the 17th century, and they were the impetus for a new national revival. And that lasted off and on for about 100 years. Unfortunately, under Peter the Great, the Zaporozhian host was wiped out. But the sense of freedom the Ukrainian people had never vanished. And more importantly, the culture, the language, through different schools, even universities, survived. And the biggest person to help out was Taras Shevchenko in the first half of the 19th century. He actually, that was one of the lowest points in Ukrainian history. He basically created our nationality to some degree. And he's the poet laureate. He is Ukraine. And that movement kept on going. The next time was just at the end of World War I, when the Ukrainian state was reconstituted. And unfortunately, the Soviets wiped it out. And then 1991, it reemerged with the collapse of the Soviet Union until this day.
Yeah, and then, of course, the crisis in 2014, and then up to date, Mr. Bukvych, I'll throw it over to you because obviously you're in constant contact with Ukraine. What are you hearing at this time? What is the situation like at this moment?
Well, first of all, if we are talking about Ukraine's history, I would like to narrow down to a very simple fact. Ukrainians were baptized and had their own university, one of the first in Europe, long before Moscow was established or even exist.
Right.
Moreover, it was Moscovites, well, or Russians now, who were helping Mongol horde to invade and to control Kiev Rus, with the capital in Kiev, which is being heavily shelled and bombed right now. So, in fact, Russians were trying to do everything to steal our history and to destroy our identity and to privatize important part of our history. This is very important, and that's why, to understand why this war against Ukraine happened. This is not war against part of Ukrainian people or part of Ukraine. This is a total war against Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history, and Ukrainian language. As we speak right now, Russian bombers, missiles, firing heavily and shelling Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian villages. They're destroying block by block residential areas. This is what happens right now as we speak. They would like to replicate the horrific situation Russia caused in Syria, for example. The horrific situation that they cast upon their own people in Chechnya back to 1994 and 1996. This is exactly what happens right now in Ukraine.
Mr. Bukvych, what about the response from Canada? How do you feel about the response from Canada and of course other allies around the world so far?
Well, we see a lot of support from Canada and from our international partners indeed. It comes to financial support, to supply of military equipment and defensive weapon, extensive support. But not everybody still realized that so far, at this moment, Ukraine is a battlefield between freedom and tyranny. And if Putin and his cronies would not be stopped in Ukraine, the next will be Baltic states, Poland, Moldova, and other countries. What happens right now, we are prevailing. Ukrainian armed forces, very well trained and motivated. They're prevailing in this war. But our weak point is air. That's why, at the moment, our major request and a plea from Ukrainian people, please shelter our skies and we will handle the rest. This is number one request from Ukrainian people right now because thousands of people are dying. I have official statistics from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, United Nations.
Okay.
So as of March 1, 249 civilians died, 31 men, 27 women, 6 boys, 3 girls, 8 children just disappeared. There are more than 500 wounded. And this is just the beginning because Russian commanders, Putin, see that Ukraine is prevailing, and now their tactics just destroy cities from the map of from the earth. They are scorching. They are striking with missiles and heavy weapons with artillery against civil residential areas in Kharkiv, in Kiev. They are trying right now at the moment to encircle big cities, and they do not care about losses among civilians.
Well, obviously, the eyes of the world are on the Russian invasion, and a lot of people, I'll bring in Anna Dombrovska here. Anna, a lot of people feeling very helpless and looking at ways to help, and CNEWA Canada is certainly one of the ways to help. There are other ways as well, and we'll be scrolling those on the screen. But Anna, tell us a little bit about how CNEWA Canada is helping out and how people here in Canada can help.
Thank you, Derick. We're all extremely stressed about the situation and following the news. I can tell about the whole community of Ukrainians in Canada, which is millions of us are here. And CNEWA is not the only charity that is now rushing all the efforts to humanitarian support. So Ukrainians in Canada are at the front line of providing support, starting with donations for humanitarian aid and ending with getting our houses to welcome refugees. We understand the crisis and the war is huge. It is expected that 4 million people will be without homes in the next week or two. Only within the first week of a full-blown war, more than 1 million Ukrainians crossed the border and left the country, and this will go on and on and on. So we have to be prepared. We have, as my organization, CNEWA, that's Catholic Near East Welfare Association, we are collecting donations, first of all, to get the help on the ground. This means humanitarian aid. Those people who were in the long journey to the border, or even from eastern Ukraine to western Ukraine, who were driving for days to get from Kyiv to Lviv. Those people don't have food. They need shelter. They need just a basic place to feel themselves human, right? So we are working closely with Caritas Ukraine, that is a humanitarian part of Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, on providing this very important needs for those who are fleeing the crisis and on the grounds everywhere where people need it.
And Anna as well, you know, the show of support is incredibly important as well. You were part of the rally that was here in Ottawa, and we've seen rallies, of course, around the world. I'll just come back to Ron for just a moment. You were at that rally as well, Ron. How important is that large show of support that we saw here in Ottawa?
It's critical.
Yeah.
Not only in Ottawa, but in Canada, across the world. It's people like Putin, they go by symbolism, and what a tremendous symbolism, seeing over 4,000 people last weekend standing up for Ukraine. I was there.
Yeah.
There were only Ukrainians. There were every other nationality. We had people who were Lithuanian, Latvian, even Belarusian with their proper flag.
Ron, I'm going to just come over to Mr. Bukvych for, we're just running out of time in this first block. So, Mr. Bukvych, maybe you could explain as well, that show of support around the world, maybe you can just speak on how important it is, as Ron was discussing. What more can we do as Canadians?
Well, as the Chargé d'affaires, I'm doing everything also to convey the message of support from Canada, from Canadian people to Ukraine, because for those Ukrainian men and women in uniform, for those who are trying to protect their families, trying to protect their homes, trying to escape, it's very important to understand that the whole world support Ukraine's fight for freedom. And so far, I think that Canadians doing a lot of actions, very important actions, they depend on the government, such as implementation of sanctions regime, imposing more severe sanctions on Russia to undermine the economic ability to finance this cynical war. This is what needs to be done. And again, my message, with this huge support, Ukraine is prevailing. Ukrainian armed forces are prevailing because they're brave and they're motivated. They're defending their own land. We need more help military-wise. We need jets. We need entire air defense system to protect our civilians from this cynical shelling by missiles and bombs from Russian jets. This is what needs to be done, and this is being discussed right now, these days in Brussels, in NATO headquarters, because a lot of bold decisions should be taken. No-fly zone should be introduced, at least at those areas of Ukraine, western parts of Ukraine, where millions of those who are seeking shelter and safety, and there are a lot of humanitarian operations. At least their no-fly zone should be introduced, and it won't be a sign of direct engagement with Russia. It be a sign of solidarity, of willingness of free world to support those who need this support and protection.
Mr. Bukvych, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Bukvych. Of course, the Chargé d'Affaires with the Ukrainian Embassy here in Canada. Also, a big thanks to Anna Dombrovska from CNEWA Canada, and Ron, who is going to be sticking with us here for this special edition of Ukrainian Profile. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more right after this.
This program is brought to you by NBA League Pass. More dunks, more slams, more to love, live in HD. NBA League Pass, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack.
How about that puck movement? Score! Right on target.
67's action on Rogers TV.
It was my daughter's birthday. She was blowing out the candles on her cake when we heard coming from the TV. So we stopped and listened, and it helped us get to safety. That's why when I think of my daughter's birthday, because now she gets to keep having them.
Coming up on Monday's Daytime Ottawa, music is back on the show. Local musician Edison Rupert is going to tell us about his brand new song that comes from a very personal experience as well. Anne Merklinger, she is the CEO of Own the Podium. She's going to tell us about the great work that they're doing, as well as a special local story. And we'll also tell you about a couple of local fundraisers coming up. So important to support our community and our charities here in Ottawa. Welcome back to this special edition of Ukrainian Profile. I am joined in studio by Ron Sorobey. Ron is the community producer of Ukrainian Profile, and we are joined online by some wonderful guests as well. We have Cassian Soltykevych, National Secretary of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Cassian, welcome to the show. Great to have you here. We also have Ferry de Kerckhove. He is a former Canadian ambassador and senior fellow at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Welcome, Ferry. And Oleh Replansky, a Canadian citizen of Ukrainian descent. Gentlemen, really appreciate you joining us here today. And Ferry, I want to start with you, and we've got a history behind Ukraine and sort of building up to this moment. Let's talk about the invasion of Ukraine and why it's happened.
Why it's happened, one of the advantages, I think, is that I lived in Russia from 92 до 5 году, 1992 to 95. And when you look at Putin today and this kind of rancor, this kind of raid, he was chased out of East Berlin when the reunification took place of Germany. So he gets there, he sees the Soviet Union collapse, he sees the population of what was the second largest, more powerful country in the world becoming an underdeveloped country with people hunting for literally for food, with a system that was a capitalistic, very, very in favor of the rich and the poor becoming poorer. This feeling of on top of that was enhanced by the personality of drunkard Yeltsin. And so Putin takes over in 2000, and we've known his perspective on the loss of the Soviet Union, the greatest catastrophe of the century. And this rancor has really fed him until today, and hopefully not tomorrow. But because the one thing I keep on reminding people, what François Mitterrand, the then French president, when at the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Moscow, said, "Please do not humiliate Russia." And I must say, if you look at it from the perspective of Putin, the West felt that they had won the Cold War. In fact, no, it's the Afghanistan war, which Russia, USSR lost, and it's actually Gorbachev who brought about the decay of the Soviet Union. And this rancor has really fed Putin at a point of wishing to reconstruct it. And we've seen the playbook in Georgia with Abkhazia and North Ossetia. We've got the playbook in Moldova. We've seen the playbook, of course, in the Donbass. And this policy is now taking an entirely different side. He wants to reassert the control of Russia on Ukraine, and he says that Kiev is an older city than Moscow, which is true. And he, fraternal fights, and we are in the situation we are today. So it's extraordinarily difficult to even understand in 2022 that we're reliving some of the scene of World War I. My father was a prisoner of war in Germany for the better part of a year and a half and was freed by the Russian at the time. And so all that history is haunting us back, and it's beyond explanation. And so I can't explain. I can only tell you that this is what Putin is all about, and this is why it is so dangerous. Is it tomorrow Latvia? Is it Estonia? What are we going to do? Is NATO powerful enough and dedicated enough and committed enough to prevent any furtherance of that? That's why today you don't have a no-fly zone, because we know perfectly well that would give Putin yet another opportunity to start even a larger war. So I'm short of words after this, because I'm just telling you what happened. I can't explain the psychology of Putin other than he's just a paranoid madman.
Yeah, and Cassian, one of the words that Ferry just mentioned there is the word haunting. And I am sure, for yourself as a Ukrainian Canadian and having family and friends back in Ukraine, that's something that comes to your mind. Let's talk from your perspective and what you're hearing from the community here in Canada and, of course, those in Ukraine.
Absolutely. So my friends and colleagues here in Canada of all stripes, non-Ukrainians, everyone alike, is shocked and dismayed at this Russian invasion, the barbaric killing of innocent civilians, the shelling we're seeing, haunting scenes back of Aleppo in Syria as well. So it's reminding of that, and it's shocking for many of us who have been to Ukraine and these cities to see the kind of destruction that's happening now and the just complete killing of civilians, of mothers, of children is completely unbelievable. It's really, really hard to imagine, and it's almost like a movie scene that you really just wish that would end, but we know it's not going to end because we have to stop them. Our friends in Ukraine, depending on what part they're in, some of them obviously are fleeing if they're in a zone currently being shelled and being attacked. Many of them have no option to leave now, and many of them are also very, very proud to be staying. They're ready to fight. Mm-hmm. They're ready to fight for democracy, for freedom, the rule of law, and for the whole free world. So everyone is ready to go. Everyone is. They wish they didn't have to do this, just like we wish we didn't have to be doing this. But Russia did invade Ukraine, and they're attacking it, and our community is going to stand by or stand up with people of Ukraine and make sure they can defend themselves and fight for our whole free world here.
And Oleh, you must have much the same perspective hearing Cassian. Let's talk about what you're hearing, and of course, your fears of when and how is this is going to end.
Yes, I very much do have the same fears as Cassian just mentioned. I have friends and family in Ukraine. I'm also very active in the Ukrainian community here in Canada. There's just a feeling of dismay, anger, resentment, and a feeling of violation that the Russians actually went ahead with an invasion. As for the actual the motives behind an invasion, that's something that Ukrainians have known for a long time. Going back to your original question about why, this invasion isn't something that Putin just thought up in the last few months. It's something that's been going on pretty much since Ukraine's independence, maybe since 95 or 2000. And this idea that Ukraine needs to be erased as an independent nation and as a country, and it can absolutely not stand as in an independent and prosperous country is quite firm in Russian leadership at the moment. As for what I see in the Ukrainian community and friends and family in Ukraine, it's pretty much united unanimously against Russia's actions. I have some family that I'm worried about in Ukraine that's actually enlisting for the army now because there's been a resurgence of patriotism in Ukraine in the last few years. And, you know, we're all basically just hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst.
Yeah, and I'll come to Ron in studio here. Ron, we talked about it before, but you know, you were at the rally. I know that Cassian emceed that rally here, and there's going to be more of them. But that support means the world of difference. Of course, there are monetary supports that need to happen. Mm-hmm. I know that the Ukraine Church on Byron Avenue, just down the road from here, they're setting up volunteer opportunities. But all of these things make a big difference, Ron.
Absolutely. Sometimes when I watch the TV, CNN or CBC, sometimes I feel alone. But when I see something on the TV like a rally, one in Berlin, 100,000 people,
yeah,
that gives me hope. I'd like to put a question to Ferry. Ferry, I had the opportunity to be in Russia a couple of times, and the Russian people, to my mind, don't really represent Putin. I wonder if you commented whether or not they share any of his values.
Yes and no, because the way the Russian population is being fed by Putin lies, and now any network has to toe the line. There's no network that is now free to say anything. Don't you dare use the word invasion. You'll have 10 years in prison. This is becoming Kafkaesque. What we see in Russia is that you have an unfortunate divide between the elder people and the new generation. The problem is that the new generation is the one that the police is controlling more severely. But I think if the population, let's say that today we have a chance over 24 hours of showing what the Russian soldiers are doing, what is happening in Kiev, I think you'd have an explosion of anger. And that's not surprised that Putin is trying to control this, because I agree. You know, the Russian have gone through a hell, and of course today now it's the Ukrainian. So, but the Russian have gone through hell before in the early days of the Soviet Union, during the Second World War, during the Stalin purge, 10 millions of deaths. You know, it's unimaginable what has gone through. And then you have the fall of the Soviet Union, where you have no safety net, no security. Why would the population of Russia be in favor of invading your friendly neighbor with whom you have relation? You've got son married to Ukrainian and vice versa. So you're absolutely right. The problem is that the message is not getting through. And when it is getting through, you see a 75-year-old lady nearly pulled by their hair and thrown into a truck. So it's amazing, because you're right. I lived in Russia, and I regret to say that I love the country. And what do I say today when I see what's going on? But I wish we could have even more means than what we have with Twitter account and all of that, because that also is being controlled. So it's you're right, and I can't defend in any other way what could be done in order to better inform the population, because of course it would reject any of what is going on.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned social media, because that's a big part of this war. Oleh, I'll go over to you, because it must be disturbing. I'm sure you follow it on social media. Ferry mentioned Twitter, which can be such a source of disinformation all over the place. Is it disturbing, Oleh, to see this amount of disinformation as somebody that has family back in Ukraine?
It certainly is, and that's actually one of my biggest fears, that this disinformation takes hold with the larger public in the West that doesn't necessarily have ties with the West. I can tell you personally, I've been glued to social media for the last week since this erupted. But one thing I can say is that Russia's disinformation campaign has been really intense towards Ukraine for at least 10 years now, and certainly since 2014, since Crimea was annexed. One thing I think we should change is, we shouldn't call this an invasion. We should just call it a re-invasion, because it's kind of step 2 of the original plan that started in 2014.
Yeah.
And with disinformation, he's doing what we call a hybrid war, and he was very successful at it back in 2014. And the aim is to attack the mind of the average Western listener or policymaker and kind of cast doubt on the West's actions in the past, not just with Ukraine, but with other countries in the world, Syria, Afghanistan, and to really make people question or disengage their own sense of critical thinking. So you're kind of left sitting there going, well, what's happening anyways, and what's the truth after all? And do we really have any moral right to intervene here? And unfortunately, back in 2014, he succeeded. I'm hoping that by this point, since his attack was so overt and just so obvious, that people in the West won't do that this time. But there is indeed a concerted effort to change people's minds with Twitter, Facebook, and company.
If I could add a point on those, if I may quickly.
Certainly.
What has surprised me immensely, and it's the only thing that really gives me hope, is the size of the private sector joining into the sanction. And a lot of the undertaking were not forced on by governments. They were just honorably the moral right thing to do. When you see an oil company like Shell or BP or Total ready to lose, of course they're not poor, but ready to lose $3 billion of investment in order to really sock it to them, when you can have Visa, you can't even get any penny out of your cash machine and all that. This is immense. And the fact that although we should have started before the invasion, since we knew all about it, since the American had told weeks before that it was happening, we should have engaged into those sanctions in preventive mode as opposed to the punitive mode. But the result is that at one stage, I hope the oligarch will tell Vladimir, dostatechno. It's enough. It's enough. No, we're losing too much money, and it's not looking good for the future. And I think I want to applaud that movement, in addition to, of course, what we owe to the resilience of the Ukrainian population. I have to say that 5 times a day I have tears in my eyes when I see what's going on. And I'm supposed to be a non-emotional former diplomat, but it is one of the most emotional sides I've ever had in my life.
Cassian, Ferry mentioned those sanctions. We've seen, major FIFA chiming in, the International Ice Hockey Federation. I mean, it goes on and on. Does that give you some hope that maybe? And I guess I don't think it's possible, but is there a diplomatic solution in your mind, Cassian, to this war, to this invasion, re-invasion?
I don't think there
is.
Yes, I don't think there's a diplomatic portion to this. I think it's important to keep those lines open. I think it's important for that, but there won't be a diplomatic solution to this. An economic sanction, though, is a machine that has to keep on being pushed further. You need to sanction these oligarchs. Putin's only as powerful as he is because he has the 50 or 100 incredibly rich people around him. And if they don't have access to their funds in Switzerland, if they don't have their villas in France, if their kids can't go to Western schools and they're all stuck and they can't leave, or they're stuck wherever they are currently, that's very important. We need to see more of that and keep on pushing on that. It's been a good first step. We need to keep on seeing that being pushed more and more. If this was, as Vladimir Putin thought, it was going to be a 48-hour takeover of Kyiv, install a new crony government, it'd be a different situation. But it's day 9. Kyiv still stands, and I believe that Kyiv will always stand. But that needs to be kept on being pushed, because the longer that the Ukrainian army can hold back the Russian invasion or re-invasion, this is better for those sanctions to work, because it might not seem like a big deal for, I can't get my cash today. But in a week, in 2 weeks, with every single passing day, more and more people will get upset. More will be questioning what's really going on. And not only the oligarchs, but the regular people will also be feeling that. If they can't use their visas, they can't pay for the metro using their Apple Pay or Google Pay. These are all very important steps. But we want to see more of that. We're happy to see the companies that have done that so far, but we need to keep on seeing more and more of that happening. These oligarchs have made their riches because of the West, because of democracy, and exploiting the Russian population, and then moving their money to the West. So seize their assets, seize their boats, seize their yachts, seize their villas, house refugees in them, and then keep on putting the pressure on them, and they will. And it's on them to turn around and go, well, we want a leader who can save our money and keep us wealthy, not one that's ruining our whole country.
Ferry, probably a difficult question to answer, but how do you see this? How do you see this ending?
Okay. Prophets are not born in their own country, but you said no diplomatic solution. I would say that you're right, there's no diplomatic solution, but at the end of the day, once everything will collapse, there will have to be a resumption of some sort of diplomatic dialogue, because don't forget, there's going to be a huge work of reconstruction, but there's also going to be a huge work of rebuilding confidence in the country that invades a European country. You know, in a way, there's a certain inequity, a natural inequality in our minds, because we've seen Russia doing that in Syria, we've seen Russia intervening in Libya, we've seen it all, but that's further land, and, you know, let's have a few resolutions at the UN. This time it cuts into the heart of Europe, and Russia will come out of that so diminished that, in a way, despite the catastrophe that is meted out on Ukraine, there will have to be some sort of rebuilding in order to exclude any potential return to this kind of paranoid approach to foreign relation, to this kind of hatred, this kind of appropriation. As I said, I'm still in total disbelief after more than 7 days, but diplomacy will have to return. And that's why a lot of people have been critical of Macron, the French president, because he talked to Putin. Well, you still have to have one connection, even though every time Macron comes out of it beaten up and groggy because he's been punched mentally by Putin, who says, I'll go to that until the very end. But you still have to be able at one stage to create a kind of framework within which talks could eventually progress, even when the oligarchs themselves will have pushed Putin aside. You will still have to deal with the conflict, and that's why I think diplomacy will remain essential further down the road.
Yeah, well said. Ferry, Kerckhove, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Oleh, Replansky, thank you for joining us as well. Cassian, you're going to stay on with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more on this special edition of Ukrainian Profile.
As the fighting continues in Ukraine, thousands of people are fleeing for their lives, forced to leave everything behind. You can help them. Your donation to the Humanitarian Coalition will provide food, water, shelter, and medical care to the people of Ukraine who urgently need it. Call 1-855-461-2154 or donate online today at together.ca. That's together.ca. The Humanitarian Coalition. Together, saving more lives.
Hi, I'm Daniela Croco, a holistic chef, and I take simple ingredients and turn them into delicious eats, customized to your specific needs. If you don't eat eggs or you have an allergy to eggs, you can use a flax egg or some chia seed egg. If you don't like coconut, you could use Greek yogurt. Join me every week for Simply Cooking by Chef right here on Rogers TV.
Play 4 games of bingo from the comfort of your own home each Monday at 7 p.m. for your chance to win money from our $2,000 regular bingo or $5,000 super bingo night. Kiwanis TV Bingo Mondays at 7 p.m. on Rogers TV.
When you're online, Rogers TV on YouTube shares news and events from your community, like messages from local leaders, updates on the latest health news, local business presenting their new offerings, and how our local communities are working their way through these unprecedented times. Visit and subscribe to Rogers TV on YouTube for the latest local information.
Every year, dozens of Canadians are killed or seriously injured because they take risks around railway tracks. Talk to your loved ones about rail safety. Visit stoptracktragedies.ca.
You're watching Rogers TV.
Welcome back to this special edition of Ukrainian Profile. I'm your host, Derick Fage, joined in studio yet again by Ron Sorobey. He is the community producer of Ukrainian Profile. And then joining us online virtually, we are joined by Cassian Soltykevych, National Secretary for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Oleh Replansky, again joining us as well, Canadian citizen of Ukrainian descent. And our newest member of the panel, Warren Kreitz. He is a lawyer and certified specialist in immigration and refugee law. Thank you so much for joining us and for continuing to join us, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Warren, I wanted to start with you because you have put out a special measures and guidance regarding Ukraine nationals. Let's talk about that guidance. And of course, you can speak upon, because I know you've been getting a lot of calls, just what the immigration and refugee situation looks like at the moment.
Yeah. Well, the reason I put together that information and guidance point document and distribute, I posted it and published it this morning. I wanted it to be as current because there is a lot of confusion and misunderstanding, but also considerable urgency to helping a very significant number of people leave Ukraine, or those that are already outside of Ukraine, to help them come to Canada. The Canadian government, of course, has pledged massive support, perhaps unprecedented in my lifetime, at least.
Yeah.
In 36 years of practicing in this field as an immigration lawyer. So there are two or three things that are notable. First of all, at this moment in time, a Canadian visitor visa, often referred to as a temporary resident visa, is still required by those nationals of Ukraine who want to visit Canada. The logistics to obtain the visa for those who don't already have it are very challenging.
Okay.
And so what the government has pledged to do is to make it simple, make it fast, make it easier. And they've deployed special resources into neighboring countries, particularly into Poland, to help facilitate or speed up the processing of applications that probably before this crisis, many of which would have been refused. So what they want to do is reduce the refusal rate, increase the acceptance rate, and allow for more people in this desperate situation to come to Canada temporarily as visitors, and then stay here for as long as they want to, up to perhaps and including 2 years. And while here, they can apply for and get work permits. They can apply for, there'll be special measures related to family sponsorship. So the government is, I think, reacting in a very timely way with very significant program initiatives, the details of which are not all in place now, but will come so in the coming days and a couple of weeks.
Warren, how can Ukrainian Canadians help their families in Ukraine to speed up the process?
Well, the first thing to do is to get together good documents to demonstrate that they are family here, what that relationship is. And the definition of family, I think, is going to expand. It used to only be immediate family, spouses, children, and siblings, perhaps, parents included. But I think we're going to see an expanded definition of who qualifies as a family member, first of all. Secondly, it'll be important to not just prove that, but also the financial ability of the applicants for these visas, but also perhaps the receiving family members and friends. I don't want people to think that only those Ukrainian nationals that have family in Canada are going to have an approved visitor visa application. I think there'll be plenty of others who have no family in Canada, but who have close friends or some other connection or relationship. Those people need to be encouraged too, because I think the Canadian government is saying there will be no limit, and there are open arms, and the welcome mat is getting rolled out as we talk this afternoon. So get documents together, communicate with your relatives, make sure they're safe. That's obviously the biggest priority, in a safe spot. And keep the communication going as the program requirements unfold and evolve, which are going to happen, if not daily. I think you're going to see changes and more details on this in the coming, after the weekend, early next week, because people are desperate for information and clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Oleh, I want to turn to you for a moment because you've been in communication, of course, with family in Ukraine. Have you heard from family members that are perhaps considering coming to Canada, or even considering, leaving Ukraine to go to another country at the moment?
When it comes to my family in particular, no.
Okay.
I have a pretty patriotic family, and most of them have decided to stay there regardless of the bombing and the atrocity. I do have some friends, though, that have managed to escape to Poland, but I also have some friends that decided to stay,
right.
So I can't add much more than that.
Cassian, Warren brought up an excellent point about information, and there's been, of course, lots of disinformation. We've talked about it, about the disinformation on social media, and you just recently getting a note while we were off camera for a moment that Facebook, Russia is removing Facebook from Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Russian government doesn't want the people to know the truth. What's happening out there. This is not only a new phenomenon. This has been over a decade and longer, honestly, of just blatant lies of Russian propaganda on Russia Today, on Sputnik, on all these channels to not have any truth. And the really main message that they have is to dispel that, really kind of mix people's minds of what really is truth. And Timothy Snyder, a historian at Yale, really said, if you want to rip out the heart of democracy, you go after those facts. And that's modern authoritarians like Vladimir Putin does. And you lie all the time, and then you say it's your opponents who lie, and then you confuse people, and you kind of give this message to everyone of like what is really truth, and there is no truth. And then once people are desensitized to that, and then they don't believe that there is really any truth out there, then they don't know what to believe. So there was a BBC story about a lady whose area and her neighborhood was being bombed. Her mother lives in Russia. Her mother didn't believe her that her neighborhood was being bombed. So things like that are very, very scary for us to see, and especially as we see Facebook being shut down in Russia, and we're very fearful for the Russian people, the innocent citizens who don't know what really is happening out there, and that's an incredibly dangerous thing. It's to quell any potential protest that could pop up. Making sure that the Russian regime is wanting to clamp down on any potential unrest, anything that would go against Putin and his cronies. So it's pretty much whatever they can do to stop the real information coming out there, they're doing that, and they'll just blame anything that's really happening. They'll just say it's the West doing it. It's the West is making it up. The West is Ukrainians are self-sabotaging, or they're lying, or this is a fake video, or whatever it is. It's an incredibly disturbing piece, but we know what really truth is. We know what democracy is. We know what the really important things are in the West. We have to make sure that we stand by those, by media, by the truth, and making sure that we're sharing reputable and reliable sources to one another and to our friends in Ukraine and to our friends globally around the world.
And Warren, this is nothing new. This disinformation and propaganda has been going on for a long time. Both yourself and Ron were part of groups that were overseeing that 2004 election in Ukraine. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that experience, and I'll turn my attention to Ron after you share your experience.
Sure. Well, Cassian's made an excellent point. That what's happened, what is happening now in the Ukraine is just a symptom of something that's been underway for a very, very long time with the Russian influence in the Ukraine. Leading back to 2004, when that election was, the results of that first election in that year were influenced very much by Russian thugs and mafia and other foreign state actors from Russia, putting in place a president that was pro-Russian. And that election was challenged in the Ukrainian Supreme Court. No one in the world expected that the Supreme Court of the Ukraine would show such courage and independence as to set aside that election and to order a new one. And that became known, of course, as the Orange Revolution. There was a new election held on the 25th of December, Christmas Day, our Christmas in the West, 2004. And so Ron and myself and almost 500 other Canadians were sent by Canada to be international election observers. In my case, I asked to go to the eastern area of Ukraine, where most of that Russian influence had occurred, because I wanted to see firsthand how they were harassing people and threatening people and corrupting voters and voting, more than one ballot. So I went to a city called Poltava, which is in I would call it the eastern third regional area of Ukraine. It was an amazing experience. We were trained here in Ottawa for 2 days, deployed on 2 jumbo jets. We had 2 more days of training in Kiev, and then we were deployed to our regions. We were paired up with another election observer from another country. In my case, it was a gentleman from France. And we did our work. We went to as many polling stations as we could in the days leading up to the election. And then, of course, on election day itself, to not enforce or be police officers regarding the election, but to observe things. We were given checklists and so forth to look for certain signs that might have shown undue influence. And we filed our reports. And as a result of that massive amount of observers that were sent not just by Canada, but by most countries in the Western world, it was determined by Europe and others that it had been a fair and free election. Of course, the Orange Revolution was thought to succeed at that time. It didn't. It failed in time, and even more so these days now as the occupation and invasion by Russia. But it was an incredible experience that I hope people who are committed to democracy have an opportunity to do in any country, really. It was a great honor to have been sent in such large numbers by Canada to do so. And it allowed those of us who went and to see firsthand not to take our own democracy for granted. Establishing democracies and independent democratic institutions is very difficult. It's very challenging. Canada has led a voice and expertise in that regard, including in Ukraine over many years. But even here in Canada, protecting our democracy and our democratic institutions is a very costly thing and cannot be taken for granted. You need an independent judiciary. You need independent research and other organizations, including NGOs. You need to allow them to flourish and to file reports, human rights reports included. So there's a lot to democracy. It's a word that is fully charged, but there's a lot that goes into building a democracy, but also retaining it.
Ron, what Warren's describing is much the same experience you had when you oversaw the election back in 2004.
And also in 2010, what I noticed in 2010, I had the opportunity to see voting for people who were in a AIDS, tuberculosis ward, people who are dying. And their vote mattered, their vote counted. And the way it worked was they had a relative help them prepare the ballot. And it was an amazing piece of democracy. There was a big change between 2004 and 2010, how people reacted to the chance to be a democratic country. It was truly amazing.
Well, and what we saw here in Ottawa, with the protests and people shouting freedom, Oleh, I'll go to you. When you see incidences like that happening, and then all of a sudden you see the Ukraine in this unjust war and true freedom being attacked, living here in Canada, you don't take it for granted, do you?
No, definitely not. I'd even go as far as to say that the Ukrainians are giving the world a lesson in freedom and democracy at the moment, and also a lesson in patriotism. We do kind of tend to get a bit apathetic, and I'd even venture out to say lazy here in Canada, because we've never had any similar situation as what's going on in Ukraine. But there's really much a sense that everyone needs to band together. The West has kind of left them to do it on their own. So if they want things done their way, they have to do it themselves. Nobody else can do it for them.
Cassian, I wonder, because some of that's lost in some of this conversation too is that there are many Russians that don't agree with this war, with this invasion. Do you happen to have any family or friends in Russia that you've heard from? I mean, the economy is absolutely crumbling as we speak, and there's going to be a lot of suffering in Russia as well.
Absolutely. I don't have very many friends in Russia. I know a few individuals, but for them it's scary to see what's happening. It's incredibly scary to see what the state police is doing in terms of people trying to leave Russia. into interviewing young men, going through their phones, seeing what the recent messages are, if they have any support at all or any messages regarding Ukraine. They will not be able to leave the country. The limitations on withdrawing funds. Their stock market's been closed for 5 days, and I don't even know if they could open because I think everything would go to zero pretty quickly. It's quite scary for them, but it's also for Russians in Canada here. We've had it at the rallies over the last several weeks, even before the reinvasion started. We've had many Russian community members join us because they understand that they do not support the president of Russia. They do not support Vladimir Putin. They support democracy. They do not want to see a war. Many Russians would vacation in Ukraine. Many Ukrainians would vacation in Russia. Many have friends across the border. It's incredibly difficult for them to be able to see what's happening, and sometimes even hard to even imagine that some of these things that we're seeing are truly happening. But it's only going to get worse for citizens in Russia, unfortunately, with the crackdown. We hope that people can stand up bravely, those who are standing up and protesting against the leadership. But really, this is many people know people across the border and don't want to see this happening. Well, no one in the world wants to see this happening. So we will continue to, at our rallies, we will invite all people, not only actually Russian citizens, but others of Western countries, of other NATO countries, of the Baltics, Poland, Hungary, etc., but also Belarusians. I know there will be a Belarusian representative at a rally this coming Sunday, and we know what people came out to protest in Minsk, and we stand with those people as well who want to overthrow their dictator of over 20 years. So there are people who are fighting for democracy every single day, not only in Ukraine, but there are people who want to see a democratic country and democratic leadership in Russia, in Belarus, and in other former Soviet countries as well.
Really appreciate your time today, gentlemen. Cassian, Oleh, Warren, thank you so much for joining us here on this special edition of Ukrainian Profile. I'm going to turn my attention for the rest of our time here to Ron in studio, who is the community producer here for many, many years. You've been working here since 1986. And of course, Ron, I just see how emotional this situation has been for you. Let's talk a little bit about what people at home, as a last word, that they can do to help support the Ukrainian people.
Ukrainian people have an indomitable spirit. It goes back to the Ukrainian Cossacks. They're the symbol of our freedom and courage. In fact, the poppies grow all over Ukraine. It's called the blood of the Cossacks. If people have been watching this program, they're seeing at the bottom where they can send their money to. Money is and will help Ukraine better than sending troops. If I can, and just keep the money rolling in, that's how we'll beat Putin. I'd like to end with the two lines from Ukrainian national anthem. Ukraine is not yet dead, nor is its glory or freedom. We will not spare our souls or our bodies to get freedom.
Very well put, Ron. Really appreciate your time and your commitment to the Ukrainian community here in Canada for all these years on Rogers TV. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for doing this with me today. I really appreciate it. As Ron said, he said it perfectly. You've seen it at the bottom of the screen, scrolling consistently throughout the show.